Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of Comic Book Workshop. Today we are looking at Jim Lee, and I'm going to be making some comments about some of the observations that I make in regards to his rendering style, the way that he uses ink, and the way that he kind of plots things out. And we'll also be making some observations about the way it is that he composes his image, right? The compositional things that he's doing here. So this is one of the first images that we're going to look at today. And as usual, what I like to do is I like to pull back on the image and kind of see where my eye falls and see how it is that he's using the different elements of contrast in order to pull my eye there. So the further it is that I pull back from this image, it becomes clearer and clearer, where our focal point is, which is obviously with these two figures here, right? Now, there is a lot of very subtle uh, guiding of the eye throughout the image in this piece, right? And that has to do with where it is that he puts the detail versus where he doesn't put the detail. And it also has to do with converging lines, which is basically anytime it is that we have a line that doesn't seem to continue, right? Like if I put this image away for a minute and I take, let's see, what am I doing here? Okay, so if I have an image or I have something I'm trying to draw, right? There's a couple of different things it is that I can do. You know, if I want to draw a circle, I can just draw a circle, which by the way, I'm using a mouse right now, so if it looks like horrendous, that's why. Um, so let's say I'm drawing a circle or I'm drawing something like this, okay? Now, one thing it is that I can do is I can draw the circle, or I can draw one edge of it, and then I can also draw another edge of it over here that obviously doesn't look like a circle, right? But what I mean to say is that I can leave this gap in between the two different sides of the circle, and your mind will basically complete this circle for you, okay? So even though it's kind of a shitty drawing, you understand what it is that I'm saying whenever it is that I pulled this back up. And we look at this image, and we can see different variations of that. You know, we can see these kind of converging lines where it is that a shape starts and it seems to stop, but really the reason why he's positioned it there is because he's trying to push your eye in that direction, right? So an example of this is this background element right here. We have this swoop that's going on in the background. And to, an amateur, you would look at something like that and you would think that this is kind of incidental, but it isn't, right? What it's doing is it's directing your eye where? To this focal point here. Just in the same way that this light, this shaft of light is doing what? It's pointing us in this direction. Notice that her sword is kind of creating this kind of boundary that's keeping our eye from going all the way to this side, right? And then we see another variation of this converging line with this right here, right? And then he's got his gun and he's pointing down with his gun. And where is it pointing to? It's pointing to this other element of the illustration, which is these two monsters here, right? So we have this kind of dynamic going on here with the way it is that he set the illustration up in order to help guide your eye to where it is that he wants you to look. And then clearly we see that these two guys, these two heroes here are hiding and they're getting ready to battle these monsters, right? Now, in terms of the rendering, we can see that he is very strategic with where it is that he puts the black and where it is that he puts the white. Notice that he doesn't put both of the monsters in black, right? He allows one of them to have the detail, and then he contrasts that one with one that's more in shadow. And then, of course, the figures are where we get the most amount of detail. We see in all the tech and all the armor and weapons and stuff like that, like he just goes completely nuts with the way it is that he renders it. And even though there's a lot going on here with the rendering, ultimately, if you look at the environment, you can pretty much tell how it is that the thought process that he has whenever he's rendering something, right? If he has a form that is churning, you can see from the lines it is that he's drawing, he's kind of got this sort of thing going on, right? And so it all follows the same pattern, just like with these lines here. You can look and you can see that he's the lines are all following the same direction it is that he wants you to leave, wants you to look, right? And then when we get into these darker areas, he allows himself to do some cross hatching, but there's still lines that are going in the same direction as the shape, you could say, right? Like this shape, the main lines are like here, right? And so these lines are cutting across this way. And then in the deeper shadows, he's obviously doing a kind of a crosshatch. But that's something to consider whenever it is that we're looking at the figure himself, right? He he drops lines where it is that he wants to show the curve, right? So he's very strategic the way it is that he puts his lines. And of course you can see it here, you know, on the breastplate of this character. They're all following this kind of curve, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, again, this is another really great example of how much detail it is that you can get and how much of an atmosphere you can create just with black and white. You know, throughout this month, I'm going to be going and looking at a lot of classic comic artists it is that I grew up with, like Frank Miller and Greg Capullo, and then of course we're looking at Jim Lee today. But what it is that you'll notice from looking at these guys is that they all have a very similar rendering style. You know, they're obviously looking at each other's work. And when I look at this big white shape that the cape is casting, and then the way it is that the rain is kind of just suggested with these white lines that cut through the space, right? These white lines that cut through this space. It reminds me of Frank Miller. It reminds me of some of the Sin City stuff, right? And it kind of has that feel to it. I mean, obviously it's a Jim Lee piece, but there's a lot of stuff that just kind of falls into shadow here. And then, of course, like I was mentioning before, we can see here in the comic page itself, or in the rendering of Batman himself, the same thing that I was talking about, right? Like we have these lines here, and then we have this, in order to show the churn of this form, he also goes against that as well, right? And so anytime he has a form that is churning, we can see that he's using two lines that crisscross with one another, like a cross, like literally like a cross. And that's how he shows how a form churns. When it comes to the abs, you know, it seems like he's doing the same thing, but he's using diagonal lines. And then some, he almost completely loses that in black, right? And that's what's really interesting about looking at the rendering style is that you start to see that as it gets closer to the light, we have just these lines that come out. But as it gets closer to the dark, we have this kind of cross-hatching technique, and then everything kind of fades and joins into just the big black shapes here, right? And you know, again, it's another example of how it is that he's being very particular with where it is that he puts the detail. where's the majority of the detail? It's on his focal point, which is on Batman and this gargoyle that he's standing on. It's not in the background, right? The buildings in the background are just kind of suggested, but the atmosphere is also suggested of them feeling like they're further in the distance because, of course, if something is far in the distance, it's going to have less detail. And so these lines kind of seem to suggest that they're just kind of fading into the background. This is an awesome, awesome piece. Uh, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of Spawn. I'll be looking at Greg Capullo next week, and you guys will see what it is that I mean. Because Greg Capullo and Todd McFarlane, they did some shots with Batman with like, he's got machine guns and stuff like that. So it really reminds me of that. But if you're doing superhero stuff, I think a big part of doing the superhero stuff is like the crazy amount of detail on the tech, the weapons, making the weapons look right. It seems like with some comic stuff, if you get the tech right, you can almost kind of do whatever you want with the figure himself. But again, we see the same sort of thing. We see strong composition, a lot of use of black, very specific with where it is that he puts his detail. This is a super complicated group shot here, and man, I remember whenever he was doing his work on this book, and like these characters are so well illustrated. Yeah, it's beautiful work. This is kind of a side by side comparison of the way it is that he did his pencils versus the way it is that it looks like whenever it's a finished piece, right? And again, we have this same sort of thing. We clearly see that whenever he's doing his pencils, he's being very specific with where it is that he wants to put the detail and what it is that he actually wants to show you. For example, he could have very easily just dropped this hand into that shadow. And honestly, it kind of makes sense that it would be dropped into shadow because everything around it is completely black, right? In the final image. But the hands are so expressive. They're such a key element of expression. You have the face, but the hands are another way. It's a way to communicate what the character is actually feeling, right? And I think we can see that even echoed here in the hands and the way it is that uh, her hands kind of have this expression of being interrupted in the middle of something. Like she's churning and she's looking at Batman, right? And then you could almost say that this is kind of the exact opposite, right? His hands are very this figure here in the back. His hands is very occupied with something that he's doing, right? So you can express the mentality of a character just by a gesture of the hand. I think he does that really well in this image. Again, you can look at this image and you can see the way it is that he's using contrast in order to draw your eye to very specific things. And he's being very particular about what it is that he wants to show you and the way that he organizes it. For example, we have these serrated knife-like edges on Batman's glove here. Notice that the cape doesn't overlap here. The cape doesn't overlap with with that. Instead, there's this black space, right? And that allows him to create these edges here. Likewise, notice that he's got his cape in his hand, but it's kind of creating this line, and it's actually creating a space as it connects with the shadow. It's connecting to this space that really creates like a pocket of interest where he can put these other two characters and what it is that they're doing and the tech it is that they're working on. He can put that down here in this space. He doesn't overlap, in other words, he doesn't overlap this cape with what's going on here in the background. And because there's so much detail in this bottom left of this image, he drops this left side into shadow completely so that it's not competing with what's going on over here, right? And then when he wants to put the detail of what's going on with Batman, he puts it on the leg that's stepping forward, the hands, the chest, the head, and this kind of swooping um, gesture that's kind of drawing our eyes. You can look at each of these lines, like literally each of these lines on the cape is basically pulling your eye towards him, right? So it's all these converging lines, like we were talking about before. They they seem to the average viewer, they don't draw as much explicit attention because it's very subtle. It's very subtly drawing your attention towards it. Even the way it is that the shapes, these black shapes here, what are they doing? They're all pointing up towards Batman. They're all collecting around his face, right? Like there's all these different shapes, and they're all pointing upwards towards him. This is a really cool one. So this is a recent piece. This is back in 2021. Yeah, I mean, like he has an insane amount of detail going on here, an almost manic level of detail. Like it feels much more freeform than some of the other stuff it is that we were looking at. We just got a couple more images here, and then we'll go ahead and close it out. Again, there's a lot of different things it is that you can learn from looking at somebody like Jim Lee and looking at the way it is that he organizes his image that helps tell a story, but it also makes it visually appealing and interesting, right? Like we have this image, it looks like Batman and Superman are kind of having some sort of a disagreement, and we have this image of Batman swooping in, and all of the detail and everything is over here on this right side, right? So clearly he's leaving detail for any kind of text or and also creating an element of contrast that really pulls your eye into this direction. So there's kind of like this, you could say, almost a zigzag sort of thing going on. Like we have the image pulls us this way, and then we go down here and then down. So there's a way it is that you can pull the eye around the page that makes it visually appealing, right? And even here, whenever we look at just this panel itself, we can see that there's basically two different curves going on here. We have this big curve in the arm of the figure, and then we have this curve of the posture of Superman. So they're kind of like they're two different curves that are forming one another. This is kind of confusing. Is this Superman or is this Superman? I don't know. Um, but again, these this curve of the arm, it keeps within this. It stays within the same level as the cape here, right? No, it looks quite messy now. Let me throw that away and do it again. So we have the cape here. It's coming off of the off screen, off the panel, and it follows all the way through and curves with the figure itself. Right? Same thing here. We have similar things. We have this we have this cape that kind of creates a border, and then we have this gesture of Batman, right? So there's a lot of curves going on. And notice that whenever he puts a curve one way, like here, he balances it with the other side, which keeps your eye from basically falling off the page. And then, of course, this is just a shot of the two of them looking menacingly at one another. But it's framed, beautifully. Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, this is a Jim Lee piece. I don't know if he inked it. It doesn't really look like the way that he inks. The inks almost look too, they look almost too clean in a way. But again, we have this same sort of thing. We have a grouping of different shapes by value, essentially. There's a good amount of this image. There's a good amount of the Joker, Catwoman, Batman, and then these two figures down at the bottom that fall into the black and that basically emerge out of the black. It is the put down, including the environmental element of the smoke in the top left, right? And then as he gets into the detail, we can see that he's using a couple of different techniques for cross hatching, and I think I'll make a video specifically on different cross hatching techniques. But you can see overall that he's using a couple of different things, right? Like he's got this big shape of the head, and he's covering it with these lines that are going across. When it needs to change direction, again, he's cross hatching. He's going with the direction of it, right? And this also helps create the illusion of light because we think the light is hitting here. So we know that this is going to fall into shadow right here, the forehead area. But it's not going to fall into as much shadow as the other parts that are completely turned away from the light, which would be these shapes down here, right? And yeah, this is just an awesome piece. I just wanted to share this. There is such an insane amount of detail going on here. And I really think that it's an awesome piece. Yeah, really, really cool. All right, guys, that's all I got for now. If you'd like to support what it is that I do, I've got some links down in the bottom. You can check out my comic. I also have a buy me a coffee link as well as my website. I got some prints, shirts, and whatnot. Feel free to drop a like, drop a comment. Let me know what you think. And thanks, guys. Take care.